This is One on One. We're pleased to be joined by an old friend of our family and a scholar and an observer of Newark who needs to be listened to. He is Bob Curvin, the author of a wonderful book called Inside Newark, Decline, Rebellion, and the Search for Transformation. Good to see you, Bob.
Good to see you. Really quite a pleasure.
Bob, I told you, this is one of those books that, for those of us who are born and raised in the city, you sit down and you read and you don't want to put down. 5 years to write this book?
At least 5, probably more. You know, much of it is really a part of my life.
You grew up in the city?
I grew up in Belleville, actually, in Silver Lake section, right off of Bloomfield Avenue, 2 blocks from Newark. I'm really a Newark guy. I was born in Newark. My family had moved to Belleville when I was very young, and when I came back from service, we moved here in Newark, and I've been here ever since.
And you've seen an awful lot. You write about the riots. You call it the rebellion. By the way, why is it the rebellion of 1967? As a young boy, I grew up calling it the riots. You mentioned in the book that a lot of kids left their homes. I was one of those kids that left our home for Belleville. My aunt lived in Belleville, and my father reluctantly let us leave because it was so dangerous in the neighborhood. Why do you call it the rebellion and not the riots?
Well, I try to explain that there are 2 categories. You know, one is riot and one is rebellion. And riot puts you in a frame of mind where you really are focusing on the people, the criminality, breaking windows, doing a whole variety of things, looting and so on. If you talk about a rebellion, the focus is really on the institutions. And you're saying, help me. You know, the answer for rebellion is more efforts to really change the conditions that led to the disturbance. In a riot, the effort is to lock people up. And the concern is the anger to criminality. Now, what I find interesting is that so many people have focused on this difference of view about what this means. But I mentioned this in the book that, in a way, this is a kind of a street-level theory of we want to see the city become better. And I think that to take something positive, at least for the community, out of this horrible experience, because I also mentioned that a riot is a form of insanity in a way. But to take something positive, to look to a vision of improvement, is perhaps a gift in a way.
Let's put it in perspective. Bob Curvin was there the night in July of 1967. As a young boy, I remember hearing on the radio, sitting around there with our family, the incident happens. A cab driver by the name of John Smith is dragged by the police, different accounts of it, but Bob Curvin was a first-hand witness to a lot of this. The cops drag him. He is beaten, allegedly. Bob Curvin's pulled in and asked by law enforcement officials to try to curb the situation and tamp things down. 3 to 5 days of horrible things happen. So here's my question. By the way, get the book, read it, put out by Rutgers University Press. You want to find out the details, but here's my question. The long-term implications, Bob, of that rebellion on the future of the city this many years later, describe it.
Well, I would say that there is, at this point in our history, there is a profound misconception about the effect of the riot, because in fact, when Reverend Howard picked up the book, he said, I'm glad you got the sequence right.
By the way, Reverend Howard was also part of this series. He was just sitting in that chair a few hours ago. Go ahead.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So the point is that the decline comes first. And the city was in serious decline when 1967 happened. The riot did not, or rebellion, whatever you want to call it, did not create the decline that the city was faced with. It made it worse, for sure. It hardened many attitudes about the city, negative attitudes about the city as a place of rancor, crime, conflict, corruption.
Be clear, folks, at the time of the riot rebellion, a mayor by the name of Adenizio was the mayor, controlled by the mob, the mafia. They controlled the jobs in the city.
Right.
He was beholden to them, and in many ways, African Americans had no opportunity to progress in the city. There was only one black councilman, I believe it was Irving Turner, back in the day, and there was no real political
power. Well, Calvin West had also won in
but he was part of the administration,
the administration, exactly.
The administration. The point is this: there were more and more blacks in the city, but they had no power.
Right.
And the cops and the black community were in great conflict.
Really,
which, by the way, is fascinating as we do this program. The federal government stepping in, and there's going to be a federal monitor looking at the police, which is interesting. This many years later. It wasn't shocking to you that that situation happened in '67, right?
I think that many people anticipated it. You know, there were riots going on all over the country. In fact, some people were saying, well, why not Newark? Because the tensions were so great. The social problems certainly were there. And the police were really not disciplined. I point out in the book that the year before, the police put riot gear in the back of their cars so everybody could see it, as though they were, expecting a riot next week.
Yeah.
And it was only at the protests of the NAACP that they took the riot gear out of the windows of the cars. But it was really a very, very bad situation that could only lead to something ugly and devastating. Now, I should say the other point is that how did it affect the community? And I think it unified the community in a way that had not been unified before. Blacks and Puerto Ricans came together, they had a convention, they decided that the real answer is for us to capture City Hall.
And in 1970, Ken Gibson becomes mayor. He serves mayor for 16 years. Again, Sharp James becomes mayor after that. Again, read the book to find out a lot of the details.
Right.
Why do you believe, Bob, that so many mayors in the city of Newark, Adenizio in the 1960s, Ken Gibson after that, Sharp James after that, wound up having legal slash criminal problems, corruption in their administrations? Is there something about Newark?
I think there's something about cities, and certainly the urban kind of communities of Baltimore, Boston, Detroit, Chicago. I mean, one of our injustices that people often point to Newark as the case. It's not the case. It's one example of a whole range of tensions about how do you get opportunity. And some of this corruption comes from things that we call the mob, because if you go back 40, 50 years ago, many of their immigrant families were closed out of the legitimate opportunity system, as blacks were in later years when they came north. So that was their way of trying to get jobs, to create businesses, to send their kids off to college. And the next generation, their kids are lawyers, accountants, doctors, and what have you.
The promise and the delivery of Cory Booker, you see this over many, many years. You look at Cory Booker, who comes in from Harrington Park, not a product of the city of Newark. Right? Unlike a lot of mayors. You say Cory Booker did what for this city?
I think he made some marginal improvements. But I would also say that he didn't live up to the promises that he made. And he certainly did not meet the expectations that many of his supporters had.
Unrealistic expectations?
Well, I think they were unrealistic. I mean, if a mayor comes into a city and says, I'm going to create a new standard of urban transformation right here in Newark, you know that can't be true, because the problems that you would have to change are long-standing. They are deeply entrenched.
Such as, Bob?
The legacy of discrimination, the housing policies that were imposed on the country in the 30s.
You're talking about redlining, that blacks couldn't get mortgages.
And mortgage
restrictions
restrictions and so on. You're not going to change that overnight, and no mayor is going to change that in one term or even two terms.
What
not
about
even
crime?
Crime is the byproduct, and I use the word payback in a way for a society that has almost totally excluded and subjugated a class of people. And race helps to define so much in this society. We don't have an answer for it as yet. When we see these, hundreds and hundreds of young men walking around, standing around, and then we read the paper about some of the almost inexplicable, crazy criminal behavior that occurs. It's related.
I'm sorry for interrupting, Bob, but devil's advocate.
Okay.
Race is at the core. But if someone were to say, wait a minute, the city like Newark has had a black mayor since 1970.
Right.
Right? Mm-hmm. And a black-dominated city council.
Right.
So the black power structure, right?
Well, the black-dominated city council came maybe 8 years after
That's true.
Gibson.
That's true.
Yeah.
Because they're fair.
Right.
Could someone say, you know what? That at a certain point, that racism is hard to use as an explanation if blacks were in political power.
Right.
What would you say to that?
I would say that it's only part of the story, because the Newark's problems are national problems. They're not local problems. I think and the same thing with Detroit and Boston, Baltimore, whatever. When you talk about unemployment, for example, and jobs, it's even greater than national. It's global. We're talking about how global markets and global competition now have wiped away the kind of little petty jobs that you and I used to have when we were kids. I could always find some kind of work if it were washing bottles in a soda factory down the street, shining shoes, whatever. But today, it's a very different world. It really is.
After writing this book, by the way, go out and get the book. It's called Inside Newark: Decline, Rebellion, and the Search for Transformation with Bob Curvin. I want to ask you, how optimistic are you? Ras Baraka is the new mayor.
Right.
By the way, in the book, Ras Baraka's dad is written about extensively. Amiri Baraka, my dad, Steve Adebato Sr., a good friend of yours, is written about extensively.
For many years.
He loves the parts where you say nice things about him. I didn't read him the other parts. Real quick, before I let you go, how optimistic are you about the future of the city of Newark?
I'm modestly optimistic. I think Ras has been handed a very, very challenging situation. He's got to clean up a lot of mess that was left behind by his predecessor.
Really?
The budget,
Do you mean by Luis Quintana, who was the interim mayor, or Cory Booker?
I mean by Cory Booker.
Really?
Yeah. Well, look how he.
About $100 million gap in the budget.
Yeah. We were told a couple of years ago that the budget was all fixed, that he had a consultant, a brilliant consultant, who had come in and figured out, how to fix the budget for at least 5 years. But it certainly is not true, and he's got to figure out how to. I mean, that's number one priority. I think we've got to give him time. I think I would be very optimistic. I'm not very optimistic, but I would be very optimistic, not because of Ras, but because of the situation that he's facing. If, in fact, he could just solve this budget issue and get the governor and the state to come in and do what the right thing.
Next time we'll talk about education with Bob Curvin.
Okay.
Stay right there.
Okay.
You've written a wonderful book, and I want everyone to go out and get it. And
Thank you so much.
It's an honor for us to have you here.
Thank you.
Particularly because you're one of my dad's best friends.
I am really pleased to be able to do this, really.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you so much.
It was wonderful. Stay right there.
Okay.
One-on-One with Steve Adebato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating over 25 years of broadcast excellence. Funding for this special edition of One-on-One with Steve Adebato at NJIT has been provided by New Jersey Institute of Technology, Prudential Financial's Global Communications Department, Audible.com, Barnabas Health, TD Bank, Josh S. Weston, and by the law firm of Gibbons, P.C. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area. This program has been made possible in part by the Fidelco Group.